Thank you, Sophia Beverly, and the NSU Earth Day and Sustainability Committee for inviting me to give a talk today from Objects to Beings, Exploring the Rights of Nature in Our Fight for the Planet. I am Dr. Christine Hall. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that NSU campuses are situated on the ancestral lands of a variety of tribal nations, and including but not limited to Caddo, Osage, Ouachita, Kickapoo, Lakota, Tuapaw, and the current homelands of Cherokee Nation, the United Cotulla Band of Cherokee Indians, and Muskogee Creek Nation. I also want to honor and thank the land, water, and other beings of these places. They too have stories. And remember, I am committed to continually learning about Indigenous issues and building relationships with all beings. So I'm going to begin my conversation today with a story. And in this case, we're going to visit Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania, the heart of Pennsylvania, between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, home to about 7,000 residents. And Tamaqua is no stranger to a variety of environmental issues. There are 3 nearby Superfund sites, and it's survived and existed through numerous coal-related pollution incidences. Recently, the coal industry there has been on the decline, and as a result, they've left these gigantic pits nearby, some of which are twice the size of Tamaqua. Well, these coal companies made these pits available for a price to outside companies for disposing of waste. These companies were from New Jersey and New York. The waste includes sewage sludge, river dredge, and fly ash. Fly ash is a byproduct of processing coal and is toxic. River dredge actually came from the Delaware River, which was polluted. They removed those rocks and wanted to put that in those pits. And then sewage sludge, which right away sounds pretty gross. I don't even have to define that, right? That includes human, hospital, and industrial chemicals, including PCBs. So of course, these companies, all along the way, they never offered any sorts of protection or lining against leaching of these materials in the pits. And so Tamaqua residents, they went to their Department of Environmental Protection and discussed these problems at length, but they really didn't find any kind of solutions. And so, meanwhile, their waterways, they were covered in oily yellow-orange slime from runoff from some of the coal pits, and they'd had enough. They couldn't take it anymore, and they got no help from their Department of Environmental Protection. So what they did is they grouped together. Some of the residents created an organization called the Army for a Clean Environment. And they worked with the Community of Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which is also in Pennsylvania, and with their current mayor at the time of Tamaqua. And they wrote a ballot initiative that was passed by their city council in 2006. This ordinance stated, first, these corporations are banned from dumping, disposing of any sorts of waste within the Tamaqua city limits. And they also recognize that natural communities and ecosystems are legal persons and have rights. At the same time, they say that residents in Tamaqua can use their voices to basically sue for damages to those ecosystems and natural communities. And any damages they receive go back to repair those ecosystems or natural communities. And with that ordinance, they also strips the rights of corporations from having similar rights, because under the US law, right, corporations, they have constitutional rights, just like persons. Say, for instance, the right of free expression and equal protection under the law. And corporations can even claim that their rights have been infringed, just like a human person. And so with this ordinance, they recognize the rights of nature at the same time stripping corporations from their rights within this city, within Tamaqua. And at that time, this was the first time in the United States or across the globe that anybody had written down in any kind of legalese the rights of nature as something, a part of a policy or law. Now, it had been incorporated in other things, but not specifically rights of nature in law, recognizing parts of nature to have rights or be a legal person. And this basically got the quick, everybody around the globe is like, what is this? This is crazy. This is radical stuff. What do you mean the environment or ecosystems or natural communities can have legal personhood or rights, like civil rights? And so this became kind of a burst of all sorts of discussions across the globe about rights of nature. Now, unfortunately, the ordinance didn't really work. And the dumping continued until 2007, the following year, when the coal company didn't pay its taxes and was in permit violation. So it got closed down. So it wasn't the ordinance that banned it, but they didn't pay their taxes. The same year, Tamaqua passed a second ordinance, and it banned all corporate waste, and also put inside that ordinance saying that any residents can enforce the ordinances, because they were worried with a change in council, with the elections, that new council members wouldn't enforce these bans. And so they put it within that ordinance that even residents can try to enforce the ban. And this was a really interesting case, not just the first, because it was a great place for local control and decision-making to happen around environmental rights. And this kind of goes back to an idea that's called home rule. And so there are 43 states in the United States that either have home rule or limited home rule, which means that municipalities and counties have the ability to create their own policy as long as it doesn't contradict with state or federal laws. And Pennsylvania is one of those home rule states. Well, they had that support, but the state attorney general soon followed and filed 5 lawsuits against Tamaqua saying these ordinances are illegal and unconstitutional. Well, because they're in a home rule state and the ordinance didn't contradict with those state or federal laws, then Tamaqua got to keep and retain and enforce those ordinances. Now, there are also some interesting things happening here in Tamaqua with 7,000 residents. In the last presidential election, 70% of people in Tamaqua voted conservative. So this also reiterates the fact that despite what you might believe or perspectives that you have, these communities can come together across the aisle or wherever and work together for the environment. Everybody wants clean water, clean air, clean land, and it doesn't matter your political beliefs, they can all work together. And so there's already 1/7 of the population of Tamaqua that belongs to that Army for the Clean Environment, which is really incredible. Now, with that in mind, when you think about our environmental laws here in the United States, and I pose a question to you if you want to answer, are our environmental laws and policies working? It's kind of a loaded question, maybe. So does anybody want to respond to that question?
Slowly.
Very slowly. That's a great answer. Slowly, great. That's the perfect answer. Good. Anybody else?
Intermittently.
Intermittently. That's also a really good word describing it. Good.
It also, I mean, it's all kind of the same thing, but it also depends on who's in office.
Right.
Right. So political will, if you will.
Right. Right. No, that's exactly right. Good. Anybody else? So there's no doubt, right? We had the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act in the 70s, and they have made a difference, but it's not enough. There are things happening across the United States still today, just like in Tamaqua, and those policies are either unseen or ignored or set by the wayside. So we have to do something more. And this is where the rights of nature kind of steps in. So our idea of a Western law system in the United States is based on the fact that nature is considered a good. It's commodifiable, it's disposable, We can own it and do whatever we want with it. And with that idea, there's also the environment. Our environmental law totally ignores all species except for humans. Nothing else is considered. And in fact, as long as you don't degrade the environment to a point where we don't have clean water and clean air, then everything's okay. This is based on the idea referred to as mechanistic worldview. And this is really old worldview, and it takes the earth and describes it as a machine. That it has unfeeling, discrete individual parts and everything works, but there's no thought, there's no feeling, there's no senses, it just works as a machine. And this idea also removes humans from nature. So in fact, not just separating humans from nature, but also holding humans above nature, that they can control and dominate nature. And this worldview has gone into our ideas of Western science up until recently. That's been changing over the last decade or so. Earth science and biological sciences now don't see just discrete parts of ecosystems, but they see the holistic view, how it works together, how everything is dynamic and flows from place to place, not just this machine-like, movement. It's this flow and has to be studied in patterns and from a worldview all the way down to the individual parts. There's not just the parts, it's everything and how it interacts and relates to each other. Now, our Western legal system and that Western kind of science, old school, is just one viewpoint. There are lots of philosophies and worldviews, and one of them is described kind of in this circle here at the bottom of the slide. And it starts at the top with interconnectedness. So all things on earth are interconnected. All beings are interconnected, and they have this respect or relationship with each other, affecting and impacting all things. And in this system, our system of systems, it's non-hierarchical. So that means humans, they have a place, but all these other beings have their own place too, in the fact that they interact and build relationships with each other, all striving for some sort of harmony or balance. And this responsibility to do whatever you're supposed to do so it impacts everything for that balance and that harmony with each other. Looking at things holistically, and each part is important and relevant and works together as a community so that we build these reciprocal relationships of give and take, and all that is interconnected in our systems so that all beings are interdependent on each other. It's not just humans, it's all beings. And so this is just a different worldview as opposed to the Western legal system view. So another question that I have is, why might seeing ourselves as part of nature instead of separate, why is that valuable? And you can answer if you want. So why is seeing ourselves as part of nature valuable as opposed to separate from it?
I think it gives a stronger claim to demand for protections.
Right, no, that's great, that's great.
I think
Good.
it makes us more responsible.
Okay, good.
Or supposed to, yeah.
Good.
It's, or have that feeling of, I'm part of this, and so I need to do my part.
Right, right. You're part of that. You want that connection, right? That you want to be part of the solution.
Well, humans are the only species that degrade the environment.
Right. No, that's definitely true. Anybody else?
I think it's valuable because you can't live without it.
Right. 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 It's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Because we can't live without it.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so when we're part of something, you want to consider and respect, and you have that responsibility for other parts, right? Other beings in that system. So it's important to kind of see ourselves as part of that.
That's the beginning of the Mississippi River.
Yes, it is. That's right. That's right.
Right there.
If you look closely, that's me.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. As a part, right? A big part.
Yeah, there's water.
Yeah, and then there's concern about extraction and the pipeline, oil pipeline. Yeah, but yeah, Itasca, Lake Itasca is the beginning of the Mississippi.
Up there. That's it.
That's right. So to kind of talk a little bit about this part of a system, I want to talk about forests. And this professor in British Columbia, Dr. Suzanne Samar, she's been doing research for decades in forest systems with red cedar, Douglas fir, and paper birch. She hasn't been studying the trees. In fact, she's been studying the mycorrhizal fungal network, or the fungi that connect the trees together. And through lab work, forest work, and with all sorts of colleagues over decades, she's discovered a few things. One of those is that paper birch and Douglas fir, they share the same fungal network. And along this fungal network, these two species of trees share carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water with each other. They share those resources. They also share stress signals and defensive signals, and like enzymes. The Douglas fir sends out signals and tells its neighbors, you need to start producing disease-resistant enzymes. And the birch are like, hey, we got this antibiotic like material here, Douglas fir, have some of this. So it's not always about competition. It's also about working within that system. These old, really old Douglas fir trees that are massive, when they die, they release their carbon into the fungal network, sharing it with its neighbors. These large old Douglas fir are connected to more individual trees than anybody else in the network. They're hubs, or she calls them mother trees. And these mother trees, they can actually feed and provide nutrients to seedlings nearby, both paper birch and Douglas fir. And they even give a little more to the Douglas fir, their own kin, so they can tell the difference, which is pretty incredible. Some of these old trees, they even tested, well, can they tell the difference between Douglas fir from like other mountain ranges? So they planted them. And in fact, the old Douglas fir trees, they shared the nutrients with both their own genetic family kin and then seeds from other mountain ranges. But they gave their own kin a little more, so they could tell the difference. So it's really interesting. Today in biology and earth sciences, we call that complex adaptive systems, which includes community and the idea of sharing resources, reciprocity, the importance of elders, diversity, and that builds resilience in the forest. It's a really incredible new idea that's very old in this interconnection and rethinking how our forests are. Of course, there's still competition, but there's also other things happening in the forest, not just competition. That system of importance. Well, that brings us kind of to the idea of rights of nature. And there are lots of definitions, so I just picked three kind of to talk about today. One of them is recognize that non-human elements should be treated as legal entities with the rights to exist, thrive, and regenerate. The regeneration, the recognition by legislation or jurisprudence of the legally enforceable rights of nature, ecosystems, and species. Meaning this is kind of like civil rights type protections, and they strengthen environmental law. Now, this doesn't mean that if a river floods your house, you can sue the river. That's not how it works, because they are considered legal persons with slightly different rights. And then earth jurisprudence, the legal philosophy that humans must adapt their legal, political, economic, and social systems to be consistent with the way the natural world actually works, rather than fighting against the lawful order and trying to force nature to conform to human will. And this prioritizing maintaining balance and a dynamic equilibrium within healthy ecosystems. Now, these ideas about beings being part of the natural system that are non-human, this idea has been around since time immemorial. But in the American legal system, it kind of reemerged in the 70s. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. These ideas are based on inherent rights. So as a human, I have rights because I exist. Just like a stream exists, it should also have rights because it has that intrinsic value. The water's just not there for recreation or for agriculture or industry or for us to drink. It exists and is part of a system and has value in and of itself, intrinsic value. So this reemergence kind of started in the American kind of legal realm in 1972 with a guy called Christopher Stone. And he wrote a Southern California Law Review article entitled, "Should Trees Have Standing Toward Legal Rights for Natural Objects?" And in this article, he discussed many things, but one of the things he talked about was at the time there was a case between Sierra Club and this Morton, which was really Walt Disney. So Walt Disney wanted to build a massive ski resort in the Sequoia National Forest. And the foresters had already agreed to let them do this. So they would purchase lands, they would need to cut down trees, they would need to resurface the land, and then also build a massive road into the national forest. And so the Sierra Club like, no, you can't do that. So it started in lower courts, ended up all the way up into the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically decided that Sierra Club, you know, like how is it hurting you? And the Sierra Club's, well, it's hurting the forest. And so the Supreme Court basically decided, well, since it's not hurting you, then we're going to dismiss the case. Well, Stone said, well, you might not be getting harmed, but the forest is, maybe we should rethink the standing or the legal rights of, in this case, trees. And what happened with that is the Sierra Club actually found members and campers that had visited sites and they were going to be harmed in this making of the Walt Disney Ski Resort, 1.5 plus million people, which is a little insane, more people than in Disneyland. And so they were working toward trying to find another way. In the meantime, the governor at that time, he says, we're not going to pay for this road. That's too much money. And so one thing led to another and it kind of fell through and didn't happen. But that idea was there. And the dissenter on the Supreme Court, he actually referenced that article. So then it got a little more awareness. And then after that, in the 80s through the 2004, there were several cases brought forth based on animals and plants and their rights. And that was kind of mixed results. And in 2005, Navajo Nation, their council, tribal council, they, based on their worldview and traditional ideas of nature and the natural world, they kind of took those ideas and put those into tribal law at the same time banning uranium mining. But it wasn't until 2006 with Tamaqua that the rights of nature or natural communities or ecosystems were written out as legal persons. In 2008, Ecuador became the first country to incorporate the rights of nature in their constitution. And we'll talk about Ecuador in just a little bit. If you're interested in more details of the history, there are several websites for timelines. One of them here is the Community of Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which is the one that helps Tamaqua. And then the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature is the middle one there. And then Center for Environmental Rights, that's actually a center of democratic and environmental rights, which is a great place to start. They also have trainings and videos for anybody interested about learning more about the rights of nature. Well, based on some articles, Bradshaw from the Southern California Law Review, that came out last year, and a book called The Politics of the Rights of Nature, Strategies for Building a More Sustainable Future. I kind of put some ideas together in a table, and these are two model structures for the rights of nature. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other models, or in fact, these two models sometimes interweave with each other, but it was just kind of a visual way to represent these two models, which we're going to talk about examples from both. So the one on the left is nature's rights model, and you can find this model in Ecuador's constitution and in some United States ordinances and tribal law. It says all nature within a legal jurisdiction or area has rights, and the unique rights for these ecosystems are recognized, meaning you have a right to live, survive, regenerate, not be polluted, those types of rights. Anyone can speak for nature, but you're not obligated or required to. And then the rights of nature are protected when violations are reported and upheld. So in this case, that model is more reactive. So when you have a polluter come in, and dump a variety of sewage sludge. Then there's a reaction, and sometimes it's ordinances, and some, like in Tamaqua, or court cases. This can happen in constitutions, as I mentioned, local and national court rulings, other regulatory policy, and tribal law. And so we're going to talk about some examples of that. And then the other model is what's called legal personhood model. And the example from that is New Zealand. In this model, rights of a particular ecosystem are recognized. This might be the whole entire river system, or a forest system, or even a mountain range. And they have human rights, or our legal personhood. And we'll talk about that when we talk about New Zealand, to extend to all sorts of ecosystems. And they have specific guardians that are required to represent and speak up for a particular ecosystem. That's what those guardians do. They might be made up of local peoples or government officials, but those people are obligated to be the voice of that river or that forest. And these guardians, they're embedded in the system of management, so that they use their voices to be the voices of that river when they discuss policies relating to watershed management or any kind of forest development, that those people represent that forest or river in those discussions and decision making. And these are often based on treaty settlements or renegotiation of treaty settlements in New Zealand. These two graphs kind of give you an idea of the world view or world kind of events. From 06 to 2021, at the top there, they show legal types. These legal types, you guys see my notes? Legal types start at the bottom here: other official documents, indigenous law, policy, local regulations like those ordinances, court decisions, and then national laws. And that would be where Ecuador and Bolivia fall. You can see the big boom in those over time. The bottom graph shows the status of these cases from 06 to 2021. Dark green means they passed, light green means ongoing, and then you have the other ones here. Overturned is this orange kind of color. And of the 39 countries that have kind of started rights of nature policy, out of all those, 430 policies have been initiated in 2022. Of those, 409 have passed. Of the 39 countries, 90% of those initiatives have to do with a small area like a municipality or a forest. And 10% of those actually involve outside of a country, which means it could be a river that crosses country boundaries, like in Bangladesh, across parts of India and into China, or it could be the whole entire earth. So it's different scales of rights of nature. As of early 2021, the indigenous nations listed there are some of the tribal nations on Turtle Island or North America that have incorporated rights of nature into their tribal law. We're going to talk about the White Earth Band of the Ojibwe in just a minute. Out of all these conversations came the International Tribunal for the Rights of Nature. And it's this tribunal that hears evidence and cases across the globe. They don't really have any kind of power to implement any punishments, but their decisions can provide support for those that are experiencing those polluters or extraction services to a degree. So it's a place to kind of find out where things are going wrong and trying to offer solutions, and then a way for people to work together on those solutions. To look up close to the United States there, this is 2021 data, and these are color-coded. States are by the number of laws. So light blue is 1 to 3 laws, dark blue is 4 to 10 laws, and green is 11 to 31 laws. And then the dots mean what types. So we've got, actually this is 2 in Oklahoma, but it's from the same tribal nation. The Ponca Nation has embedded rights of nature into its tribal law. There are also court decisions in red. You can see Pennsylvania, man, Pennsylvania's been busy. That's where Tamaka was, right? Also where that nonprofit was. Pennsylvania, remember, is a home rule state. You can see Ohio's also been busy, and New Hampshire. New Hampshire is not a home rule state, but they've been making some interesting policies there at local levels. There's also Florida. Florida is a home rule state, in California. But then there's some that might surprise you. So that's how it looked in 2021, and the graphic at the bottom also shows you from 06 to 2020, what's passed in dark blue, ongoing, and overturned in black. And these are all from this article right here. And at the end of this article, there's a website, and we're going to see if I can technically go there. Let's see, did that work? Oops, hang on. Oops, maybe not. I want to go here.
There you go.
So this website is like a summary of all the cases, and it's hard to read on the projector, but I encourage you to go to the website. It lists what's happening, the status of cases, and then you can actually zoom into specific locations. So if we zoom in into one of these, maybe here in Florida, we've got 3 here. Zoom in here. Then it tells you this was the Orange County U.S. Charter Amendment protecting these 2 waterways from algal blooms in 2020. And then you can learn more by clicking here. So you can go across the globe to find out where the status of the cases and how they might look different or similar to each other. And there's all sorts of other information here. And they define their terms under this tracker link. To find out more, I'd encourage you to check it out. Okay, now let's see if we can get back. Okay. I want to draw your attention to, well, everybody know where Ecuador is? So, like, out there, right? There's 72 there on Ecuador. Remember in 2008, Ecuador embedded rights of nature into its constitution, becoming the first country to do so. And in its description of Earth, it reflects the Andean indigenous worldview of nature, Pachamama. Pachamama is Mother Earth, or source of life and well-being. And it reflects this holistic approach that sees nature has intrinsic value and an emphasis on maintaining balance in those ecosystems. This was an example of rights of nature and indigenous rights interweaving themselves together into what some call biocultural rights. The list of specific rights are nature's rights to exist in our constitution. This is what it says: rights to exist, to be respected, to regenerate its vital cycles and processes, to maintain its integrity as a distinct, self-regulating, interrelated being, and to not have its genetic structure modified in a manner that threatens its integrity or healthy function. And any person, people, states, private institutions have an obligation to recognize and enforce these rights of nature and establish precautionary and restrictive measures to prevent human activities from causing species extinction, destruction of ecosystems, and threatens the integrity of healthy functioning and these cycles. Now, in the beginning and the lower court systems in Ecuador, the judges didn't quite understand the rights of nature laws. They didn't understand what it meant, what the consequences would mean, but over time, they kind of got traction. And a lot of the cases started to bend toward rights of nature, also raising awareness of this idea of rights of nature. And from 2008 to 2020, out of the 38 cases in court, 31 of them succeeded. The ones that didn't, most of those are early on. And in 2011, the Vilcabamba River was the world's first successful rights of nature lawsuit. This company was building a massive road, and they scraped the surface, the soil, and the rocks and dirt into the river, and it squished the river up, confined it, and then caused flooding downstream. And so then those people downstream, they used their voice to represent the river and the rest of nature, and took that company to court. To find out more, you can check out that website from the Global Alliance of Rights of Nature. Now we're going to go to New Zealand. So New Zealand is home to the Maori, which are indigenous to New Zealand. And for over 140 years, Maori have been using their voices to try to get the government of New Zealand to recognize parts of nature. So 140 years, that's multi-generational. So it's not just one family or one group, it's generations of people. And in 2014 and in 2017, the Te Ura Forest, I don't speak Maori, I barely speak English, so the Te Ura Forest and the Te Awatupa, which is the Wanganui River, in 2017 were acknowledged as legal persons. They have personhood. And through this negotiation between New Zealand government and the Maori, based on early treaties, they kind of created this new way of governance. And this governance was based on Maori worldviews, knowledge, traditions, and culture. Where Maori, they view the forest and the river as living ancestors. And they emphasize the role of guardians in this idea or model of rights of nature. For the forest, a Maori iwi, or which is a tribe or a group of Maori, near the forest, went to the government and said, you know, we want to be able to, you know, collect things in the forest. We see some things that we could probably do better for the forest than the New Zealand government, you know, so we would happily take care of the forest. And New Zealand's like, whoa, that's forest is a national park. We are not selling you a national park. Well, through conversations, the New Zealand government realized that this group of Maori didn't want to own the forest. They just wanted to interact and be responsible for it and to connect to their culture. So the solution was that the forest, in fact, owns itself. I'm gonna let that take it. So the forest itself owns itself, okay? And in this process, they created a board. And the board members are the voice of the forest in all discussions and policy changes related to any kind of management for that forest. So the board members don't represent the government, they don't represent the Maori, they represent that forest. And so this guardianship is embedded in the decision-making policies itself. It's kind of similar for the Te Awatupa Act or the Wanganui River. And for the Wanganui River, it was recognized as a living entity, indivisible from the mountains to the sea. So when the rain fell on the tops of the mountains, all the way through the channels and all the tributaries to the ocean, that the Wanganui was all living entity from one end to the other, and it exists. And so I'll let you think about that, what happens when it enters the ocean, and what that might mean. But in this case, the river itself has the right not to be polluted, not to be degraded, and not to be overdrawn. And it was assigned two guardians, one Maori and one from the government. And they represent the voice of the river in all cases or in policy conversations about the watershed management policies, which is embedded in that structure. These laws remain untested because of the way they were set up and embedded in the decision-making policies like the watershed management or forest management policies. These are more proactive models as opposed to reactive models. Now we're going to go to Minnesota. I have no idea what time it is. Oh my goodness. We're going to go to Minnesota, and in 2018, the White Earth Band of the Ojibwe recognized the rights of Manoomin wild rights as part of their tribal treaty of 1855. It specifically mentions wild rice and fresh water as part of the treaty with the United States. And so in their tribal law, they state that wild rice possesses inherent rights to exist, flourish, regenerate, evolve, and inherent rights to restore and recover and for its preservation. And they also listed specific rights that you see here. In 2021, Manoomin wild rice and the White Earth Band of Ojibwe filed a lawsuit against the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, stating let Enbridge Line 3, which is a tar sands pipeline, go underneath this rice bed. And so Minnesota Department of Natural Resources says, Yeah, you can't just say that. You can't do that. The state is the one who makes decisions. And then the Manoomin and the White Earth Band said, well, not only that, we're going to tribal court. And the Department of Natural Resources says, hey, no, we're not going to tribal court. We're going to go to Minnesota court. Well, that got dismissed and they ended up in tribal court. Well, in tribal court, they saw the case, but said they don't have jurisdiction to make a decision because the pipeline runs not just through that wild rice bed, but other places too. So then the Manoomin and White Earth Band, they appealed and they received the same decision again. So that's kind of at a stalemate. This was the first plant to have rights of nature embedded in some sort of policy. And then the last example is Santa Monica, California. They've been working on a sustainable city plan since the mid-90s, and they decided they want to incorporate more stronger policy for the rights of nature. So at a municipal level for their sustainability plan, so they had lots of drafts, they talked to lots of stakeholders, and in 2013, they unanimously passed this policy. They cited Ecuador in 2008, and also the city of Pittsburgh Bill of Rights in 2010, which we didn't get a chance to talk about. That's related to fracking. I'd encourage you to check that out if you're interested. And in this sustainability policy, it elevates the rights of people, community, and nature over corporative rights. And it states, natural communities and ecosystems possess fundamental and inalienable rights to exist and flourish in the city of Santa Monica to effectuate, that means operate. Those rights on behalf of the environment, residents of the city may bring actions to protect these natural communities and ecosystems defined as groundwater aquifers, atmospheric systems, marine waters, and native species within the city boundaries. This is a great example of the rights of nature intertwined with democratic principles of ruling yourself and your own community. They created indicators to measure their progress based on their goals, which are listed here. They measure them every 2 years. And you can check out the cool website at the bottom. They have dashboards that tell you how well they're doing. So you can look up and say, how's our transportation system doing? You know, how has it improved over time? So it's actually a really cool way to think about it. Proactive way to think about the rights of nature. In this reading and watching videos, I came across this quote by Casey Camp Pernick of Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. It says, in passing the rights of nature in the Ponca tribal law, for the first time we saw our indigenous values and rights reflected in Western law. We are not people protecting nature. We are nature protecting itself. This is a powerful way to create system change. So in fact, it's a way to see ourselves, right, as part of nature, and that nature is protecting ourselves. And so what does that mean for us and our fight for the planet? Well, one, we need to educate ourselves about the environmental issues where we live. You know, does it have to do with water? Does it have to do with deforestation? Does it have to do with mining? Does it have to do with polluters? What are the polluters? We have to first educate ourselves about that. Then we need to have conversations about rights of nature. What's our worldview? How do we view ourselves in nature? Then we need to have discussions about how does our political system in our communities or counties work? In our state, how does that work? What would it look like in a state that does not have home rule? What would it look like in a state that does? How is it different? We have to start to think about these things, because if we can see places like this, the Illinois River, as an entity, a being that has rights and a right to exist and not be polluted, maybe that would change our perspectives. First, taking responsibility for ourselves, but then also being that voice, in this case, for the Illinois. So I want to return to the beginning with a story. Okay, so I was a little nervous because these are, I write poetry, okay, I confess. I'm not saying it's good, but I write. So I'm a
tortured poet.
So I'm gonna share one, and this is in fact my gift to you all today. This is one I wrote last week. So it's water path stories. Watching the pinks, oranges, and purples merge as the sun sets, hearing birds, crickets, and frogs exchange stories as night falls. Wanting to be included, I walk toward the pasture, drawn to earth, hand touching the cool soil, eyes closed. My breath slows, eternally cycling air fills my lungs, and then I release it. Water in the ground guides me to the edge of the pond. On the path back to me, water touches tree roots, talking to each other. I feel their conversations. The water moves to my hand carrying stories of old, of today, and of tomorrow. Step onto the path. You are the warrior. Use your voice. Battle on. We see you. We are with you. We are you. And so with that, I'll take questions. I'll take questions, although I'm not a lawyer, but I will happily take questions. I also have slides with all the references and videos if you're interested.